authors, all fiction. I built them as mysteries, but when I started reading, I'm not sure that they would be all called mysteries. So, but they're all wonderful. And this is Stan. Is it Bruni or Bruni? Bruni. And he will go first. And Liz Lipperman. And Lee Figueiredo.
That's why it's Leon Dalton.
And, yes, she writes as Lisbeth. Lisbeth?
Yes. Oh,
Sure. But this man writes under his own name. Okay, so I turn it over to you, Stan.
You'll have to excuse me for using notes. My memory used to be good, but not so much anymore. First of all, I'll mention a few things that where I came from and how I got started. During the seemingly unending 14 years while I was receiving my preliminary and formal medical education, specialty education, and certification, by chance, I also received my first exposure to writing and publishing. I never had plans for being an author, but it's been quite interesting after it all started. As a first-year college freshman, I was seeking my bachelor's degree, and my English professor required of all her students to write a short story about any subject. She gave us that privilege, but to write a story. And so as a former athlete coming out of high school and now in college, sports was still on my mind. So my short story was a coach, 11 boys, and a pigskin. And unbelievably, I didn't think much about it, but I guess my professor liked it because she chose it, and it was read over the university's radio station.
Wow.
And I did receive a pretty good grade that year in English. My second effort came a few years later, and this was part of my academic requirements for receiving my master's degree in physiology and biophysics in the University College of Medicine. My research happened to deal with the infant NASA program, and my thesis gained their interest, and as a fledgling graduate student, I had NASA representatives visit me and my prototype professor. And shortly thereafter, my publication was, my thesis that I had written was chosen for a national journal, scientific journal. Well, that was my first two episodes of writing, and I still had my goal of becoming a doctor and not as an author. After finally obtaining my medical degrees and certification and specialty training and so forth, I had a medical career which was very successful in specialty medicine and radiology for about 30 years. In the meantime, I had gained other interests besides medicine. One of them was raising cattle. And I was in Texas, and I was a self-appointed cowboy. We raised for 20 years on our ranch Texas Longhorns, and I got to meet many people across the country with that through the Longhorn industry. And during my retirement years after 1995, I left medicine, and I had always been an artist, and I had used both my art skills and the writing to begin different articles and so forth for the Longhorn Journal and so forth. One of the things after I retired and was on the ranch taking care of cows, I kept hearing friends of mine say, I wish Grandpa had written down things before he died. Or I wish Grandma had done that. They had an interesting life and they did a lot of things, and I wish they would have written those things down so we could read them and pass them on to our kids and grandkids. And I kept hearing that from different people. And I thought, you know, there's something to this. Am I missing the boat? I've had a pretty interesting, kind of a wild experience life. And maybe my grandkids would like to know someday what I have done. And that was the beginning. I thought, I'll just write my autobiography and I'll just publish it for my extended family, which I did, and I self-published the autobiography. It was called Self-Portrait. I enjoyed that a great deal, writing that. It brought back many, many memories. And then one day, a friend of mine got a hold of it, because I didn't put this out for sale or anything like that. A friend of mine happened to get a hold of it and read it. And she said, you know, you ought to write some stories. And I thought, well, that might be fun. I could mix that with taking care of longhorn cattle. And that was better than fixing fence and so forth. So I sat down and I started writing short stories. And I ended up, after a period of time, I wrote 8 short stories, and I assembled them together, and they were all fiction, and ended up publishing it. It was called Dead End Roads. And the subject of the stories, basically each one, was how a person can start out life as a very respectable individual and end up going and taking the wrong road and ending up in crime or violence or any number of things and ruining their life. And all of these stories had basically that same theme. And I published that book. And then one of the readers saw me one day and they said, you know, that one story called fantasy, you need to write that into a book and expand it. Fantasy locked in a criminal mind. It's about a boy who starts out as a really good kid, and he ends up on Texas death row. And that book has been recognized by a lot of different would-be writers and publishers, and I've just never followed up on it. And I'm no promoter of books, so I just have given up on a lot of them. But one of the books that I wrote was a historic fiction taking place here in North Texas, specifically Gainesville. If you've ever been up Highway 287 and on your way to Amarillo or someplace, you pass by Gainesville, and historically there's a very interesting story about that city. Perhaps historically it's been said that the single and the largest outbreak of vigilante violence in American history dates back to the month of October 1862. That became the heart of the book Justice, No Time for Justice that I wrote. On the streets and just outside the town of Gainesville was on the east bank of the Pecan Creek, there was a huge elm tree, and it was the site of multiple hangings. Remember, the Civil War is in progress. During the many years that have passed since the war's conclusion, virtually every one of its great battles and campaigns have been studied and written about by scholars and historians. Yet, the vigilante violence that occurred in Gainesville, Texas, was cloaked with silence and secrecy. Whatever prose was written was surfaced was muzzled. By 1867, 2 years after the war's armistice, the post-Civil War Reconstruction period was sputtering to a close, and what occurred in Gainesville was rapidly fading from the national memory. Details and accurate accounting remained limited, so that only in modern times the subject has rehashed and even known. Today, many people don't even know it existed. When I was going to research this, I went to the Gainesville Library, and I walked up and I talked to this woman at the desk, and I told her I would appreciate if she would direct me to or pull out some historic books that they might have relative to the Civil War and the Gainesville area. during the Civil War. She says, "What are you planning to do?" I said, "Well, I'm writing a book, and I understand that there was some events that took place." I took it real easy. Events that took place in Gainesville, and I need to research some material on it. Well, the look on her face, she just blanched. And I realized very quickly I was talking to a woman that wasn't very pleased about even talking to me about it. But anyway, needless to say, I researched the event, and this became the heart of that book. It's a very interesting story. I thought you've probably all, at some time or other, you're all avid readers. At some time, you've all probably thought about bestsellers and the bestseller list. The odds for any unknown author of ever becoming a top seller of books is pretty extremely rare and minimal. But still, it's not impossible. The publishing industry is highly competitive, and many talented writers struggle at first just to get an agent, let alone get published, and least of all, becoming a bestseller. Quality writing, strong story, and having effective marketing and a bit of luck is what is the distinctive role that it takes to become a top seller. As an avid reader, I'm sure you have thought about this. Let me give you a few statistics. For those authors who make the effort to write multiple completed books and send their manuscripts to agents, about 1 in 20 make it on to just the next level. As for this country, 300,000 books are published each year. 0.08% end up with a bestseller. Realistically, the most straightforward measure for capturing a bestseller status for an author is how many copies of the book are sold. Yet, the executives and publishers disagree on that number. Some say 10,000 copies, others say 35,000 copies. According to the Guinness Book of Records, the Christian Bible is and has been the best-selling book of all time. Over 5 billion copies. Ironically, that book, the Bible, happens to be the most often shoplifted.
I shall not see it.
Now, I know these authors have thought about this. A first-time author can typically expect to sell between 200 and 300 copies of his first book during the first year. A great many sell fewer than 100, and some sell less than 5 to 10 for the first month. Improved sales depend upon consistent promotion. Romance consistently tops the list of best-selling books. The genre generates billions of dollars in revenue. Mystery and thrillers rank high. Have you ever thought about what an author's signature on a book is worth?
Nothing,
25 cents.
unless you're related to them.
An author's signature of a book has, according to statistics, some value. 10 to 25% if the author is still living. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've taken a few minutes to give you some varied personal thoughts regarding writing, my own experiences, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that I can. I would refer you all to my books, which I have here, and you're welcome to check them out and enjoy them if you can. And I've had some comments of people, residents here at Robson, that have read them and enjoyed them. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
I have a question. When you say books, does that count the ones that you can pull up on your screens and stuff, or physical books? However many books were sold.
How many books?
She's saying, are you counting, when you're counting books sold, are you talking about books on paper?
E-books.
Or books that you can read on
Digital.
screen?
No.
And digital.
Does that include digital?
Digital, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I have a question. I want to know more about that vigilante violence. I live in Lake Iowa, and I want,
You never heard
can you
of
expand on that a
What's
little?
that about?
There's a monument to it in Gainesville.
Really? I
Yes.
lived at Lake Iowa, which is like a mile from
Oh my
Gainesville. I never
gosh.
saw it.
To this day, as I understand and what I have learned, it's still today, there's many people
Hush,
that
hush.
want to hush the subject.
You
I don't
can
understand what it is. Well, vigilante, what did they go after the?
Well,
the-
first of all, you
the-
gotta,
The
historically,
Northerners?
there were, remember, this is in the 1850s and 60s.
Okay.
There were few, Denton County, or Cook County, I should say, was, when Gainesville became the county seat in 1848.
Okay.
The growth of that area was very slow for a while. People just weren't moving into that area. Then Butterfield, which I wrote about,
I was on the
developed
Butterfield.
that overland stage U.S. mail route from St. Louis to San Francisco. That was in the 1850s. And people then started migrating towards this area of Texas and so forth. In the meantime, the people that settled here came from two different areas. They either were called Upper Southern or Lower Southern. Upper Southern were from the states north of the Mason-Dixon group
So they were.
and so forth. And so it depended upon whether they had slaves or not. The Lower South people brought their slaves when they came and moved into Texas. Whereas the northern, or northern southern, if you want to call it,
The Deep South.
didn't bring slaves. They didn't have slaves. So when they settled, now we've got people, when the secession of Texas occurred, which was unanimous to go Confederate, we had people that were still Unionists that were living in Cook County and so forth. And so right away, they became fearful of what was going to happen. So they had some kind of little groups starting to gather together to police themselves. We also had the Indians in the territory that were raising Cain with the settlers, the Plains Indians, and so that was all the problem. And so the Unions, the Confederates in the area were fewer than the Unionists in that area. However, they, being with slaves and fewer in number, the Confederate people that had moved in from the Lower South with their slaves, they were more aggressive. And they became then recognized economically more often and with power. And so the Unionist people were hesitant about what they would do of being around them. And the vigilante all started from there.
They gathered people up. Oh,
Yep.
Now, did you say all of this you just said was in one of your books? Called
It's mentioned.
something?
It just
Oh,
so
yes,
happens
mentioned.
that it became a heart of my book, and since I had, my ranch was up by Bowie, and it was close enough to Gainesville that I got interested when I first heard about this, and I went off from there, and
I wonder, it's probably
Liz?
not taught in Texas history.
We ready for me?
I'm ready for you. You can't keep putting off.
She's
I'm teasing her.
She feels my heart. I'm not a speaker. I can BS with the best of them. I can tell you dirty jokes all day long, but put me in front of somebody and I need oxygen and Valium. So
Can you
I'm
all
going to
hear
make this
her?
short and sweet and then let you ask me questions.
Can everybody hear
Can
this?
you hear me or you want me to use the thing? You want me to use it? Hello, you hear me? Like I said, I'm not a speaker. My name is Liz Lipperman. I write as Liz Lipperman. I write G-rated Liz Lippermans, and Liz Beth Lipperman are the little bit grittier ones. They have, some of them have sex, some of them have language. They all have humor, and they all have murders. You know, I'm up between these two brainiacs here, and all I do is kill people, so. You kill a lot of people. I'll tell you my story. I'm a registered nurse. I went to a Catholic nursing school back in my day. They didn't have not many women went to colleges to get their nursing degrees. And so I'm what's called a diploma nurse. And I took the same state boards, made the same amount of money, did the same job. I just didn't have BSN after my name. And so when my kids, I have two kids, a girl and a boy, when they were teenagers, I decided I want those initials after my name. So I looked into it. And much to my dismay, they all wanted me to start over. I'd been a nurse for, 15 years already, and they wanted me to start over. So I thought, I'm not doing that. So what I did do was I went to St. Joseph's College in Windham, Maine. It was online. I would go to the library and she'd give me the final exams, and then I had to go on campus for 3 weeks for summer school to end it. And I decided, I got a bachelor's, BSPA, Bachelor of Science Professional Arts. And I had a lot of electives, and one of the electives I chose was creative writing. And on the final exam, when it came back to me, the professor had written across the top, "You should consider a career in fiction writing." And I thought, well, maybe I will. But that's not as easy as it sounds, right? So I wrote a book, and it was about a nurse, of course, and she was on her way to Costa Rica for a bachelorette party she was ex-military, on her way for her bachelorette party for one of her military girlfriends, and she's in the middle of a botched kidnapping at the airport, and when the leader of the rebel gang goes down, instinctively she goes to help him with her nursing, and she gets taken as a hostage. And so the whole story is basically in Colombia. And I decided, okay, I'm going to join some groups. So I joined Romance Writers of America because I was sure I was a romance writer. And it was then, it's dwindled down to almost nothing now. And I went to the local chapter, which was DARA, Dallas Area Romance Authors. They taught me everything I knew. They truly taught me everything I knew. But they didn't help me sell a book. So I finished this book, and I sent it out to agents, to publishers, that sad story. And I kept hearing, "You can't have a romance in Colombia." And I thought, why can't you? How do you think those babies are born in Colombia, So I was getting desperate, and there was a new agency that had opened, and there were two agents. One of them also took young adult, and I had a young adult that I wrote that was too gritty at the time, and now it's not even near gritty enough. But so I queried her, and she requested a full. I sent her which is the full manuscript. I sent her the full manuscript, and I got a phone call from her one day, and she said, "I love this story." I'm going to cry telling you this because this is the story of my heart. I named it Shattered Dreams, and anyway, she said, "I want to represent you." And all my friends said, "Don't do it. They don't have any sales. They're brand new." She loved my book. What could I say, So I signed with her. For 2 years, she sent that book out. For 2 years, she got the same rejections. You can't have a romance in Colombia. So her daughter was a little ice skating, an Olympic hopeful ice skater. And the coach said, "If you're really serious about this, you need to be taking her to all the competitions and entering her, and it's a full-time job." So she left the agency, supposedly a sabbatical, but she never did come back. And I was passed on to the owner, a woman who, I just love her, but she's got a mouth on her. But anyway, I met her for the first time at the Romance Writers Big Convention in Dallas. And the first thing she said to me was, "You'll never guess. You're not a romance writer, right?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Nope, you're not." I said, "What am I?" She said, "You're a mystery writer. Now go write me a mystery." So, long story short, I wrote a mystery, and it was a paranormal. It's part of this series here. This series is about 5 sisters, and I have 4 sisters. So it's kind of based on I'm real close to them, kind of based on my relationship with them. But the middle sister gets murdered, and my middle sister died early, but she was nothing. This ghost comes back and wants them to solve her murder. My sister was nothing like this ghost. She married right out of high school, had kids, boom, 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 but she would have been dull and boring to write about. So to this day, my agent calls this my potty mouth ghost story. So, 'cause she is very, very bad. Anyway, she will make you laugh though. But she says things that I wish I could say, you know? But anyway, so she sent this book to an editor at Penguin in New York. And the response came back, I love this story, I love her voice, but I'd have to take all the good stuff out of it to make it a cozy. She said, get her to write me a cozy series. So Christine, my agent, called me and she said, she wants you to write a cozy. Can you do it? And I said, sure. What is a cozy?
What's a cozy?
And she told me it's like Murder, She Wrote. You know, it's the protagonist is not a cop, not a PI. She's just someone who stumbles onto a murder. And usually she's got a wacky group of characters with her. So I said, let me look at that, because I didn't know what a cozy was. So I did a little research and I found out that most of the cozies were about good wine and good food, gourmet food. I'm one of 9 children. I don't know what gourmet food is, and I don't want to know what gourmet food is. You know, I'm a casserole girl. So, and I don't drink wine because it gives me headaches. So I thought, I can't write that book. She wanted a foodie. She called it a foodie. See, I'm already needing oxygen. Wait a minute. Anyway, so the next morning I called her. I said, I can't do it. She said, why not? I said, I don't know anything about that. And you know, people can sense that you don't know anything about it when they read it, especially the ones that know good food and know good wine. She said, she really wants you to write, Liz. She said, why don't you sleep on it and call me back? Well, somewhere in the middle of the night, this thought came to me. I'm a huge, huge sports fan. I watch all the sports on TV. I'm a rabid Cowboy fan. So I thought, why can't I have a girl who's a journalism major from UT, who follows her boyfriend all over Texas and then gets dumped in Dallas and ends up in a small town writing the personals. And then the culinary editor gets in a jet ski accident and has to go to rehab. So they know she's got a journalism degree, so they ask her to write the culinary. It was called kitchen column, I think that's what I called it. And she said, and he said, she said, I don't know if I can do that. He said, go home and think about it. So she went home to her wacky group of friends and they said, you have to do that. You hate writing the personals. So they came up with this big idea, and I forgot to tell you, she lives on fast food and fried bologna sandwiches. She doesn't even know how to make a grilled cheese sandwich without burning it. Neither can I, by the way. Anyway, so her wacky friends convince her. There's one of them who's a hippie lady who does all the cooking on their Friday night game nights. And they decided to use her casseroles and put a fancy name on it and try to pass it off as a gourmet. And the people in this little town, which in my head is Denison, but I don't call it that. Bless you, bless you. I call it Ranchero because I don't want the cops chasing me, because I call them Dumb and Dumber in the book. But anyway, it's a big hit. So that's the premise. I have 7 books in that series, and one of which became a bestseller.
Wow.
Anyway, thank you. That's how I got into this. And then the other book that was about the 5 sisters was titled Talk Dead to Me. And so I met another publisher from another publishing agency at a conference and was talking to her about it, and she was ready to buy the book right then. I said, don't you want to read it? She said, no, I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it. So I sent it to her, and she did like it, and she gave me a 3-book contract too. But they wanted to call it the Dead Sister Talking series. So they changed the title to Live or Let, Live or Let Die was mine. I'm getting away from mine. The title was Heard It Through the Grapevine, which to this day I wonder how they came up with that, because that has nothing to do, other than the fact that it was the dead woman owned a vineyard and made wine. It had nothing to do with murder. You would never, if you looked at that, you would know that was a murder mystery. That's my naughtiest of all the books, by the way, because she wanted it naughty. So Anyway, that I went on, and then I went on to publish. I just finished publishing, well, I guess it was 2 years ago. I guess you can call it just finished publishing, a military thriller. I was talking to him about military thrillers, and of all my books, the cozies sell the best, but they're not my favorite to write. It's the little naughty ones that I like. So, and when I say naughty, I'm not talking erotic or anything. Only one of them has sex in it. And as a romance writer, you have to know how to write sex. They taught me how to write sex. So, the other ones, the ghost is just hysterical. I want to tell you one line that she says that's just one of my favorite lines ever. Her sister's in a bar, and there's a guy there had been trying to buy the vineyard, so they're thinking he might be the killer. So they dress the protagonist in the first book. They dress her up in real sexy clothes, and she goes in there, and she's in the bar, and her sister only pops in every now and then. She's looking at all the men in the bar, wondering which one it is. And all of a sudden, the ghost appears to her, and she said, "Where have you been? I've been waiting here. I'm getting nervous." And she said, "Which one is it?" She said, "See that one down at the end of the bar?" And she said, "Look at him." I'm probably going to go to hell for saying this. She says, "He couldn't get laid in a monkey whorehouse with a bag full of bananas." That's been my favorite line. Anyway, I write with a lot of humor. But anyway, so I have a total of 15 books. My husband was in a memory care unit for 15 months, and then he died 6 months ago. And I haven't been writing much because there's really nothing funny, and I just can't make it funny. But last week I wrote another chapter, so I'm really excited about that. But anyway, I'm in between these two brainiacs here, and all I do is kill people. And another thing is, I thought about it. Why did I think I was a romance writer? I belonged to a group of, at the time we were all unpublished. There were about 10 women. We were all unpublished, each one a different genre, fantasy, shapeshifters. And we'd help each other plot. And so every time we'd plot, somebody would go around and give their idea. The fantasies wanted magic. Shapeshifters, of course, wanted werewolves. The historicals wanted old people in England. I wanted to kill people. They'd come to me, I'd say, "Just kill somebody," And then I wondered why I wasn't a romance writer. But anyway, that's my story. And I'll be glad to answer. I've been published from New York, from Minnesota. Right now I have a publisher that's a niche publisher. It's called Oliver Heber Books. And I have also self-published, so if you want to ask me anything about that, I feel like I know everything about publishing, but I don't. But I feel like I can BS you into thinking I do. So if you have any questions, have at it.
You didn't tell them that you give great recipes in the cozy.
Oh yeah, my cozies, because it was a foodie, and most of the foodies have 1 or 2 recipes in the back. I sent her 10 recipes, and when I first I sent her 3 chapters and a synopsis, got a 3-book deal out of that. And I sent 10 recipes thinking she'd choose 1 or 2. She wanted all 10 of them. So I ended up having to put all 10 recipes in every one of my cozies. And they're all my good recipes. So, and another thing is the book that I'm telling you about, Columbia, I changed the name to Shattered to not make it so, because it really isn't a romance. But I just heard last week that there's a book club out here that's using it this month as their book. And that almost brought tears to my eyes because that will always be my favorite book.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Tell us one of your titles in your cozy book that has recipes. They're very catchy.
My titles are Liver Let Die, Beef Stolen Off, which by the way is Wagyu beef. Cattle rustling and Wagyu beef. Murder for the Halibut. That's the one that. That's the one that made me a national bestseller.
Wow.
Smothered, Covered, and Dead. Enchilada Bodies. steak, S-T-E-A-K, through the heart. Seems like there's one, oh, chicken catch a killer. Yeah. And the other books are, I heard it through the grapevine, is first of the naughty. Then I have Jailhouse Glock. And then, this is the fourth one. I have Mission to Kill, and then Rock Around the Corpse. And then I have Die Once More, which is my military. And I have a prequel to that called A Kiss to Die For. And that's pretty heavy. That's about a man so evil that they call him Dr. Evil. Anyway, and then I have Shattered, which again is my favorite, and I have another one called Mortal Deception. And people say, how do you get your ideas? See, you can't stop me talking now. How do you get your ideas? And for this one, I was watching 2020 one night, and they had a story about a young couple that had a child who was diagnosed with a terminal disease called Fanconi anemia. And in order to save him, they genetically engineered another embryo that was identical. Well, first of all, to have Fanconi's, both parents have to carry the gene. So they genetically engineered an embryo, and of course through IVF it was implanted, and she had this child, and the cord blood saved the other child's life. So now they have two sons. I mean, they didn't kill the kid or anything, they got it from the cord blood. So I thought, what can I do with that? So I made it two twin sisters, and one was a cop, but her husband was also a cop, and he was killed in a drug operation, and he got labeled a dirty cop. And so she was so angry, she left, she quit, and she went to work for her old boss as a PI. And in the meantime, her sister comes to her and tells her that her son has Fanconi's. And she said, and we had him, I'm gonna cry telling you this, we had my husband tested, and he's not the father. Now this was her college sweetheart. She knew she hadn't been unfaithful. It was a, what do you call those things where you go, the man goes in the back room and gives a specimen? What's that? A fertility clinic, yeah. And got mixed up. So they find out who the real father is, and he's an anesthesiologist. And he and his wife had been trying to have a baby, and so they don't want to tell this child, he's 9 years old, they don't want to tell him that his dad's not the father. They don't want this other guy trying to get weekends and holidays with him. So they concoct this ridiculous plan to dress her up, send her to the bar where he works at Fair Park every Wednesday, and they goes to this hotel and goes down to the bar, and she's researched this so she knows. They dress her up. Her idea is to get a specimen. She's already talked to the fertility people. She's got all the equipment she needs. She just needs a specimen. And
It's a really good book.
she said it's a very good book. Anyway, and that's how they're going to save the child's life, if they can save it. But the first line of that book, and when people ask me to give talks to potential writers, I always say to them, the first line in your book is the most important line in the whole book. And that's, the first line in that book is my very best first line, and it is, before the night ends, I'm going to have sex with a perfect stranger. All right, if you have questions, I probably wasted my time.
How do we get a book of yours?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Right now, if any of you have Nooks? The second book in this series, called Jailhouse Glock, is 99 cents. And if you don't have Nooks, it's a free download from your app store. And the second book, the second book in my wait a minute, I'm trying to think. I can't remember if it's this, no, I'm wrong. Beef Stolenoff, the second book in the Cozy series. There's one, and I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Jailhouse Glock. It is Jailhouse Glock. It's free right now on Amazon as a download. And if you don't have the Amazon Kindle, it's also a free download from the App Store.
And several of her books are here in our library.
Some of mine.
And what you don't have, I'll give you. I just didn't bring them because you have that rule, it can't be 5 years or whatever.
Oh, no, I take your books.
Yeah.
Robson authors don't have to have that.
Okay. So does anybody have questions? If not, I'll turn it over to this.
Yeah, well, now I'm gonna cry, because I have to follow that. My book's not just for anybody, I'm sure. We tend to write on life experiences and things like that. Can you hear this? Yeah. Great. First of all, my name's Lee Figueredo, and that's why my name on the book is Leon Dalton. Because my publisher in LA said, "What's your given name, Lee?" And I said, because I always go by Lee. He said, I said, Leon. He goes, "Oh, okay, I like that. And where are you from?" And I said, New Jersey, right outside of New York City. And he goes, "Oh my gosh, and you're writing a book?" He said, "Do they even speak English in New Jersey?"
You don't have the New Jersey accent.
No, and my dad spoke 7 languages, actually. He died when I was a little boy, but getting back to what happened was, does anybody know who Richard Bachman is? Richard Bachman. This is the story he gave me, and I knew it. My publisher said, he goes, "No one's going to remember the name Figueredo." And my mother, who was Irish and English, Byron and O'Reilly, hated Italians, so she married one. And my dad, his worst language that he spoke was English. He was first generation American, came over here. He came over from the old country, and he spoke all these languages, but he didn't speak English very well. And my grandfather was Leon John Byron. He was a PhD biochemist and ran the research center at Bayway, New Jersey, which was the old Exxon facility when he worked for me. I mean, Esso, Standard Oil Company. I'm sorry. Anyway, the publisher in Los Angeles said, "Well, where are you from?" I said, "Roselle Park." And that's a little Irish-Italian town. They both hate each other so much they marry each other. So he said, "Okay, well, we can't go with that. You can't go by Lee Park. That sounds Korean." And he says, "What about Leon?" "No, you just can't use Roselle. That doesn't make any sense. It sounds like if you said Lee Roselle, it sounds like an NFL commissioner of football or something. Yeah, Pete Roselle." So I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" He goes, "What street were you born on?" And I said, "Dalton Street." He said, "That's your name, Leon Dalton." True story. True story. And so I had no intention of ever writing a book. I'm not in the same league as these two great authors here, Dr. Stan and Liz here, but I
read Beach Reads.
well, but I am quite interested that a lot of my softball buddies didn't show up here today. This book is not just for guys. It actually is a love story as well, built into it. The ultimate love story, actually. And it was originally titled The Agent, but I have 9 of us left now, 15 buddies that have been in contact all through my military days. I spent 10 years in the military. I was a Navy diver. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam. I transferred over to the Air Force. I became an aeronautical engineer and wanted to be a test pilot. And actually I designed, we talked about art. I designed this for the Navy back in 1968 on one of my tours in Vietnam. I was drafted on my 18th birthday. The 15 of our friends I've always been in contact with. There are 9 of us left, and I send them all the stuff that I've written over the years. And I did the short story, 4 chapters, at the end of it. And that, I was bombarded by these guys. Some of them hadn't talked to me in months, but I would write a poem or something, or a short story about something, and I'd send it off, and I sent this 4-chapter short story, and they all came back with the same theme. Where's chapter 5? In fact, and my publisher thought this was really weird until he read it, because I wrote this when the subject that you heard before COVID-19 hit was about ISIS. I spent 2.5 years of my life after I left Vietnam and after 10 years in the service with Bell Helicopter International when the Shah was in power. And I was bayoneted in the throat. My oldest son is just turned 50 last week. He just retired as Lieutenant Colonel in the Air Force. He's now working with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, with their Iron Dome project that is protecting them from Hamas missiles, which I wrote about in this book before it all happened. And my oldest son, Eric, the Lieutenant Colonel, I was kind of amazed because I've been to every single place in this book. I've been to 79 countries. The 2.5 years I spent over there is a book by itself. My 50-year-old now was 3 years old back then, when we were there in 77, 78, 79, when the hostages were taken in late 78, got out after Reagan swore in, after Jimmy Carter was one-term president. Excuse me. Let me get a drink. Thank you. And so, and I'm going back and forth because I want to kind of explain why this all transpired. If there's a book in everybody, and as I said earlier, there's a book in every single person here. We all have a story to tell of some sort. This is kind of Tom Clancy-ish. I can't put myself into his, obviously, category. I just was told I've sold about 21,000 copies of this. And and it's not the numbers so much, because like I said, I had no intention of it. What happened was, between my 15 friends back then, when I started this, and my twin sister out in California, her husband has a best friend that won 2 Academy Awards. As you always see at the credits at the end, no one ever reads them, but the key grip operators and stuff, they're the ones that actually set up all of the camera angles and the rides along the roller coaster camera scenes and things like that. So, and you go into his house, and the first thing you see is the one he won for Titanic and one for Dances with Wolves. And he read the first 4 chapters, and he said, this should be a book. So I had to make the agent into the agents because of the love story. In fact, the last chapter is Aaron Brighton, the final chapter. And there's 11 chapters after it. And so it's kind of unusual, because I had to write chapter 5 for my buddies, and then 6, and then 7, and then 8. And after I had the 15 chapters written, they're going, well, there you go. You got your book. So I sent the manuscript off at the insistence of my twin sister out in California with her friend and my buddies. And COVID had hit LA really bad, if you recall, because of all the Asian influence and people traveling back and forth. And so my publisher, who never reads this stuff, we get so many books that come in, or manuscripts that come in, they have staffs to do that. But COVID had hit really hard, and this was COVID hit actually November of 2019, COVID-19. And then I was out there in January, and I started writing this book because my wife, Gail knows, from the drama club, she literally saw steam coming out of my ears. I was watching a show, I thought, and this was years ago, and I didn't realize that this book was in the back of my head. But we had President Obama was in the West Wing of the White House taking questions. And some of you may remember, I think some of you were young enough to remember this. One of the reporters asked him, he said, "Sir, what are you doing about ISIS?" And his famous answer was, "They're just the JV." They're just the JV, the junior varsity. Does anybody remember that? Okay. I had steam coming in my ears because he didn't say ISIS, he said ISIL. Does anybody know what ISIS means? ISIS. We'll be here all the time.
Not a clue.
Not a clue. But yet, we hear it on the news and go, ISIS did this, ISIS did that. But nobody asked the question, what does it stand for? The Islamic State of Iraq, the granddaddy of the Persian Empire, the old Persian Empire, Babylon, Baghdad, Tigris, Euphrates, the cradle of civilization, and the two countries that ISIS was in. Aleppo was their headquarters, Aleppo in Syria, and they had moved into Iraq when the Americans moved out and took all of our hardware we left behind. And so they were ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. ISIS, that's it. The president comes back and just the day before had been talking with Prime Minister Netanyahu from this little country called Israel. And this is all in this book, by the way, that comes out. And he comes back and says to the reporter, "We're not worried about ISIL. ISIL is the JV." And the reporter, worth his weight in salt, I would think, would have come back and said, "Well, I keep on saying ISIS, and you keep on saying ISIL. What is that? What is that?" That's the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And the Levant is the Fertile Crescent. The crescent, that's why a lot of Muslim flags will have a crescent-shaped moon on them. And that's the Levant. And the Levant is the eastern edge that goes from basically the mouth of the Nile River in Alexandria all the way through the old Persian Empire up into Istanbul in Turkey. And that's that eastern edge, the Levant. Right smack in the middle of that is a little country called Israel. We had just given back $161 billion of Iranian wealth, promising that they would never, ever make any missiles to fire on Israel. And of course, Hezbollah from the north, the Gaza Strip, which I told my wife, and you can ask her, I said 15, 20 years ago, they should make the Gaza Strip, which is about the size of Manhattan, basically, and New Jersey, the size of Israel, basically. Give you some kind of concept of what we're talking about in size. And it could have been made into a tourist trap. It could have been, it's on a beautiful part of the Mediterranean. Cruise ships could go in there instead of building tunnels into Israel. And we all know what happened on 7 October. And I had a gentleman, and I don't want to bring this down, but you want to make me cry, I'll cry here. I've seen the atrocities of war. I've seen the brutality of it, and the book can't be this book without having some of that brutality in it. But talking to an IDF who read my book and said that he went in on the 8th of October and to a kibbutz and said that what he saw was just unbelievable. He found a mother and a father in the kitchen floor. He heard a sound, and it was a little boy, 5 years old, behind a couch. Now, you're not going to hear this on the news. If they don't tell you what ISIS means, they're not going to tell you this stuff for sure, or what Hamas was up to. The little boy, when they pulled the couch off, said, "My baby brother, my baby brother." They found the baby brother in an oven, baked. Baked. 8 months old. So when you hear and I see these young people today that have Palestinian flags flying, and Israel has every right to be a free and independent country, And I even have, when I wrote this, which Trump moving was a champion of them moving the embassy from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem. And there'll never be peace. Does anybody remember Golda Meir?
Yes.
Golda Meir made a comment one time that just left such an impact on me that I didn't realize I was this serious, because I'm a pretty happy guy usually. But she said, and she says it, such a profound statement, there'll never be peace in the Middle East as long as the Muslims hate the Jews more than they love their children. And in Vietnam, there was the Viet Cong, which were the Southern sympathizers, and then you had the NVA, which was North Vietnamese Army. They go to Paris and have peace talk and said, we're not going to have any more war here. We're going to be a South Korea, North Korea. And they crossed their fingers and said, we're going to bail out of Vietnam. And those were the Paris peace talks, basically. They signed all the agreements, and as soon as we were moving out, you all saw the pictures of the American embassy and people trying to get on helicopters, making a mass exodus out of Saigon, which is Ho Chi Minh City today. We live in a small world. It's getting smaller all the time. And so this book, when I heard that about the Levant, and basically it's the President of the United States at the time, is basically saying, and I don't make this political, but it's basically saying, if you give them the Levant, you've given them Israel. It doesn't exist anymore. Because the territory they only have is Iraq right now, Iraq and Syria. That's it, ISIS, not ISIL. And I just blew steam. And so that was the impetus that I started to write this book. And it's all fiction, but it's like Clancy in a way that Clancy will take events in the book and he'll make fictional characters. Hunt for Red October, Clear and Present Danger, all the Clancy books. Jack Ryan is kind of his hero. And that was my hero in the book, was this fictitious character for the first 4 chapters. And it's a love story. So if you haven't read it, you're going to have to read it, because I'm not going to spoil it for you. But then I have to have 2 other agents come up. And one of them is another love story, a CIA agent who has been assigned to try to find out what happened in the first 4 chapters. And he teams up with a female MI6 agent who is Victoria Stone, and she is Agent 0047. 47. And that's the rest of the chapters in the book. So it really wasn't so much that I had a book in my head as so much as when I was kind of forced to do chapter 5, the book just started coming. And I think you've all been there. You don't know where it's going yet. I have a prequel to this called The Argosy Caper that I've been working on. That's the prequel to introducing them, the 2 new agents. And then I have the sequel that I'm writing right now when I get a chance. But my background, I'm ex-military. I like I said, Navy, Air Force. I was an aeronautical engineer by education, air traffic controller for several years. That's where the hair all left. It's a tough job. It really is. If you knew what air traffic control is all about, you may not get on a plane again. So we have some pretty archaic equipment in the United States, unfortunately. But anyway, that's being changed as well. So especially after some of the accidents we've had recently as well. Anyway, so that's basically it. It really truly is the first 4 chapters a love story. And there's a ongoing love story for the final 11 chapters too. So does anybody have any questions at all? I could go on and on and on.
Yeah, when's the movie coming out?
Yeah, that's it. It's funny because the guy with the 2 Oscars out in California, his son actually, his job is to read potential manuscripts. And his son was during COVID, got laid off. So that was my input possibly, because I'd sell this in a New York second. I mean, if somebody wanted to make a movie out of it, I could see Tom Cruise maybe in the first role, 'cause you know, but, and then maybe somebody a little bit younger. Yeah, he's getting there, but boy, he's still amazing. Mission Impossible, that last one, wow, part 2's coming out. But anyway, so it's action. It's action. It's not sexy really in any way. I don't really go into, other than the fact that maybe they take a shower together or something, you know, the British agent and the CIA guy. But and then they have some overnight stays in different places. But most of the is an ongoing story within a story. And the last thing I could say about it is, to just wrap it up, is the agents takes you to the covert operations, seedy, often brutal world of international terrorists and their continual threat to the civilized world. Their story is told through the lives and eyes of a seasoned CIA agent, Aaron Brighton, and his beloved partner and former French intelligence agent, Monique Barteau. Then later by the youthful team of CIA agent Justin Graham and British MI6 agent Victoria Stone. Each chapter is a story within a story that takes the reader from London and Paris to Turkey, Spain, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, the States, the whole Middle East, and around the world, as the agents battle terrorists with their tactics, intelligence, and devotion to each other. It is also a love story, that fragile line that exists between people trying to live and love in a normal relationship while living and working in a dangerous occupation that's hidden behind the cruelty, brutality, and savagery that exists in a hostile and vengeful world. So,
Lee, I have a question.
yes.
You mentioned the atrocities on October 7th.
Yes.
Are they in this book?
No.
Oh,
No,
I was
no.
gonna
What's in
say.
this book is one of the chapters, the MI6 agent, one of a very, very rich Muslim banker in London has a daughter who was actually born in London, and the mother dies, and he raised her into the Muslim culture and religion, and she's actually important because the Israelis know about her and they capture her after she had drops money off from a source that indicates it's from Iran. And we know the Iranians are backing all of these groups. Hamas doesn't have the money to build missiles, and by the way, how do they get them? Iran's over here, Israel's over here, right? Hamas is in the Gaza Strip here, and how are they coming in? So that's another thing that needs to be looked at. But in the book, I mentioned that Hamas, Hezbollah, are being financed by the Iranians who want to make Israel into basically an ashtray. So, so that's that part of it. So, did I answer your question?
You did, thank you.
Yeah.
I wondered if it was just recently.
No, it's just those things that happened. If you all recall, COVID was on no one's mind until COVID hit, and then it hit us with a smack. But everything was about ISIS at the time. Osama bin Laden, that's a story unto itself. In Afghanistan, the 31st son of a rich sultan who basically heard about this, revolution going on. And this is kind of a backstory. I might even write a book about this one because I was in Afghanistan a week before it fell to the Russians. The Soviets, actually, back then. Soviets came in, they put a puppet government in Kabul. They basically put their Afghani leadership that they were controlling from Moscow. And we had a little group of people called the Northern Alliance. If you remember, the Northern Alliance actually was funded through Texas. And one of the representatives, they made a movie with Tom Hanks on it, actually, that was funding the Northern Alliance. It's amazing what we don't hear in the United States. It's amazing what we hear, what we swallow as gospel on the news, depending on what news channel you hear. And someone like Osama bin Laden goes over, here's a guy 6'6" who should be playing basketball for the Saudis, right? Who ends up becoming almost a George Washington figure for the Afghanis. Because what happened, the history of this, is that when Gorbachev was leading the Soviets and Reagan was our president, Reagan made a comment one day and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. And we had 28 states of the Soviet Union, the Ukraine, one of them, which Putin is trying to get back. And why is he getting it back? It has nothing to do about the fact that cousins might be fighting cousins or brothers fighting brothers. They speak the same language, basically. They are a Soviet raised country, where they are today. They had nuclear sites in their area, but the thing about the Soviet Union, and I've been there many times, from both coasts, they have 11 time zones. And they have Vladivostok on the east and St. Petersburg on the west, and 7 months out of the year, they're under ice. There's very, very few seaports. They only have the Black Sea to get out of. And Crimea, that's the Crimean Peninsula, that's what they attacked first, because they need seaports. And they go through the Dardanelles, to the Aegean, out to the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, out to the Persian Gulf, out to the Indian Ocean, to the oceans of the world, to get their ships out. And that's what it's about. Why do you think Assad, remember Assad, he's been kicked out of Syria recently, they have a revolution, and you'll hear ISIS' name come again, because it's Syria. The biggest Russian seaport in the world was on the Mediterranean in Syria. And that's why he opened his arms up to bring in the Assad's family to Moscow, where he's now living. So we hear what we hear, but you don't understand the whole basis of what actually is happening. The people of Afghanistan, when that wall came down and all the Soviet armies from 28 different countries went home. They said, I'm not part of Russia anymore. I'm going to go back to my Istan, whatever Istan it was. Or I'm going back to the Ukraine, or whatever. So that's what happened. And this book touches on a lot of things that led up to where we are in the world today. When I was a much younger man, working for Bell Helicopter, and had a bayonet test in my throat. My son was 3 years old. Do you remember being 3? I was wearing a white shirt on my Geon Jeep. He was sitting next to me when this 18-year-old, 19-year-old, pimply-faced Iranian soldier comes up to me without, their bayonets are not serrated, they're razor sharp, and he put it right into the base of my throat. Missed my windpipe by this much. And all my son remembered was this white shirt that was red. And Bell Helicopter had already gone home. We didn't have, I was in Isfahan, which is about 200 miles south of Tehran. And that's another book, by the way, another story I could tell easily, because I spent 3 days on a dock in a container with 7 guys from Khatami Air Force Base, which is right close to where the mishap happened when Carter tried to free the hostages at the American embassy in Tehran. So that's another story. I got out and didn't have a dime in my pocket, had no clothes on my back, and ended up in Istanbul on a CIA, after I had been on a Turkish freighter through the Suez Canal up to Istanbul, and I had a flight from Turkey to Shannon, Ireland, while I waited to get a passport made. So I spent 2 weeks there trying to get back to this country. I landed in New York, and even though it was New York, I got down on my hands and knees and kissed the soil and said, I ain't going back over there ever again. So I just kind of built up on some of these memories of mine and kind of put them into this book. So that's...
So I have a brevity question.
Yeah.
All 3 of you.
Sure.
Obviously, you don't write a book unless you have an idea that you feel you can develop. But do you start writing, or do you do major outlines first on your chapters? Do you break down your chapters? How do you organize your thoughts
You want me to take this?
in,
Sure.
in.
You're the, yeah.
There are two
100
kind of
words or
writers.
less.
There are two kind of writers. Plotters and pansters. Pansters are the ones that sit down, they feel like their creativity is messed up if they write stuff down, so they just write. And they throw a lot of stuff away. I'm kind of a plotter. I spend 2 or 3 weeks researching, and by the way, even though my books are beach reads, you have to do a lot of research, because I guarantee you that if one thing is wrong, you're going to hear about it.
Oh, boy, are you?
For an example is in my military thriller, they sent it to Fresh Fiction. I don't know whether y'all know what Fresh Fiction is. It's a pretty big reviewing place, and the review came back saying, I love this book, but I can't review it. And my publisher said, why not? She said there are 2 glaring errors in it. Now, I send every one of my chapters to my critique partner, and we line edit each other. Next, it goes, when I'm done, it goes to 2 beta readers. Then my agent, who's a bulldog, she reads it, and then it goes to the publisher, who has 2 more copy edits. So it's been edited like what? That's 5 or 6 times. And I said, what's the errors? I have my girl looking out a window in Miami at the Gulf. And she said, I live in Florida. You can't see the Gulf.
Yeah.
And she said, and then you have your guy releasing the safety on the Glock. She said, my husband's a cop. There is no safety on a Glock.
You have to know,
Yeah.
because people, I'm sorry, people will, we talk about Glock, and that's one of the, obviously, there's several weaponry, obviously, in this book. But that's an interesting thing, because people, when you go to a movie and you'll say, hand me another clip, or throw me a clip, I'm out of clips. Well, it's not a clip, it holds the bullets as you store them. It's a magazine. But throw me a magazine. Someone throws you, so if someone throws you, ebony or something, I don't know. I don't know. Vanity Fair, I don't know what. But you obviously release it. You've seen it in the movies, or you release the little button, and magazine drops off and holds 7, 9, 12, whatever type of weapon you have. And that you have to be careful about that, because it's so much easier to say, throw me a clip. And say, oh, well, throw me a magazine. Yeah, well, some cops might, but because it has become part of the weaponry, and it's been part of our lingo now, to say clip, but it's truly a magazine.
Back to your original question. It's very, very important if you're going to write, to research.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that, as far as I'm concerned, I try in all my books, I have a fictional character who's the lead character, for example. And everything that happens in that book, I try to take the reader right along beside the main character. Yep. For example, in the book called Under the Red Blanket, that's here, this deals with crime, medical jurisprudence, and examination of the dead, crime scenes, and I take you as the reader right next to the autopsy table. And I describe everything that you're looking at. And I do this so that you'll learn. You'll learn something as a reader. Maybe you don't know anything about medicine or anything like that, but I want you to learn something that if you hear somebody that has to have an autopsy or whatever, what goes on? I describe in that book exactly what you're seeing and what's going on, so that you will learn something as a reader and not just read pages. That's my goal.
I've got a
Every
question.
book, I try to do that.
Stan, I have a question for you and for you. This prequel that I've worked on was a short story, again, like 30 pages maybe, and it introduces these later characters in this book. But I write that story as you're the person. You're the person in the book telling the story. So it's from my perspective what's happening, and just it's basically a tanker
You
lead.
write third person or
Well,
first person?
first person. This is a person who basically is narrating the story as he sees it, or she sees it. But in this particular case, it's a huge tanker ship that's leaving New Orleans to go into the Mediterranean. It's a grain ship. It's not one of the container ships. Big grain ships that have the rice and wheats or whatever. And a body, you find a body that has been planted in one of the wheat, and it turns out to be a young 15-year-old girl, and there's a sex slave movement going on in the aft part of the ship. It's a huge ship, and it's basically has a half crew on it, and there's no need for anybody really to be in the back except for these people that are part of this trafficking of these American women that are being transported over to these North African countries, and one of them gets killed, and you discover the body hidden under a pile of rice in this big, huge.
Did you have to write a sex scene?
No, because it happened. You found the dead body, and you see the two people actually burying the body. They come back to check it because they heard some noise. You actually got up. That's how it starts. You hear this clanging noise, and it's this metal fairing that's hitting, and it's waking you up, driving you crazy. So you jump down from your cruise berthing, and you go in, and you literally climb up the scaffolding, and they don't know what's going on, but they bring this body in and bury it. So that's basically how the whole thing starts.
Can you hear me?
No.
We have yours.
Yes.
I have a funny sex scene story. So in Shattered, which was supposedly my romance, I wrote my very first sex scene. And back in the day before I was published, I used to put all my books in a binder. And my friends would always say, let us read it, and I wouldn't let them because I was so afraid they'd hate it and say, boy, you suck. So, I just would never let them read it. And one time my girlfriend was going on a road trip with her husband, and she begged me to read it. So I let her take it. And on the trip, her husband said, read it out loud, I'm bored. So she read it out loud, the whole story. And when they got to the sex scene, he looked at her and he said, maybe we should pull over. And then he said, do you think she really knows all that? So I would see him look at me. And I finally said, go ahead. I know you want to ask me, go ahead. He said, do you know all that? And I said, well, I'm not saying I do, I'm not saying I don't. But the whole story's in Colombia, and I've never been there.
But you did a lot of research.
Sandra Brown talked in front of the Women's Club, 8 or 9 years ago. And she said her husband, after he read one of her books, said, what do you do when I'm not around? How do you write all
She
this
writes
stuff?
really
I know all
good
this
sex
stuff.
scenes.
Yeah.
She said it was very funny.
She had a question, I think.
We have a question back here.
So, you're talking about, if you write a fictional book, so you have to have a division there between truth, and I mean, fiction, it seems like it's just all made up, right? But what you're saying is you have to have factual stuff in there
Yes.
to make the fiction work,
Yes.
is that right?
Sometimes I research for 2 weeks, and I'll only use one sentence of that whole research.
So because, I mean, you see books turned into movies,
Mm-hmm.
and that strict discipline doesn't apply, because I've watched movies
They take a lot of
that are not
liberties.
true, or,
Well,
I mean, pick a movie, it's like, it doesn't work that way.
No,
And-
no,
But
but
you don't have to do that with movies, but even if they take a book into a movie, then
Mhm.
you have to relax those rules?
I have a chapter. Yeah, actually what happens is, like, does anybody know who David Long is?
No.
David Long. Okay, David Long was a PTSD victim who had come back from Iraq, Afghanistan, and he shot up a bunch of people and killed them in a mass shooting in California, Thousand Oaks. It was in a bar room, dance floor, if you recall. And this was a little bit after the wife and the husband had gone to a Christmas party, if you recall. I think it was in Riverside or San Bernardino. And they killed a bunch of people when we were having all these mass shootings. David Long, I used David Long's name and researched what had happened, and I made a chapter out where the two agents actually go to California, where there are these lone wolf, what you've heard the term, lone wolf. Was it a person acting on their own, or are they being trained somehow in the United States? Well, we have a place out in the Mojave Desert that looks just like beautiful downtown Middle East. I mean, you could drop a person in a parachute and you would say, are you in Syria right now, or are you in Jordan, or are you in, you're in maybe Death Valley in California. And I incorporated that real event into the two agents acting in a charade, it turns out, to find out where these PTSD former military guys, where are they being trained, and that's what that chapter is about. Taking real events.
To your point, as a medical person, when I watch like Chicago Med and on Grey's Anatomy, it just kills me, because you'll have this ER doctor, somebody comes in and needs a heart transplant, next thing you know, he's doing a heart transplant now.
Yeah.
We all know that doesn't happen. But if you try to do that in a book, they tell you about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They tell you about it.
I mean-
One time somebody said, one of my cozies, not my naughties, my cozies, and she said, one of my characters is a homosexual man. He's the comic relief. He makes me laugh so hard. But she said, I would never let my 8-year-old read this.
Well, there you go.
Who's going to let an 8-year-old read a book like that anymore? My grandchildren are in their teens. They're not even allowed to
You
read
didn't
them.
intend it to go to the 8-year-old. Exactly. So, yeah.
Okay, our time is actually up. Are there one last question from anybody? Yes.
I was curious about the first 4 chapters of your book.
Yes.
Are they actually nonfiction?
The whole book's nonfiction. There are some true events, like I just mentioned.
They're fiction. No,
But-
they're fiction.
but it's
But
all-
they're
They're
fictional
fact
characters.
based on, fiction
Fact.
based on facts.
Like, yes,
Okay.
Tom, you mentioned Tom Clancy earlier. Tom Clancy, the military has been all over him, because how does he know all these things? He does his research, of course, but he describes the inside of a submarine like nobody. I was on submarines. That's what this is about. When I was a diver as well, I was trained in submarines as well. And he writes like he's been living on a submarine. I mean, the guy gets his
Arthur
stuff.
Haley, same way.
Yeah,
Books he wrote.
it's exactly.
Yeah.
It's so precise, and the research is amazing, and how he gets away with it because, well, he's Tom Clancy, and you've got the Richard Bachman thing I mentioned earlier, by the way, is Stephen King. Richard Bachman, the early works of Stephen King is Richard Bachman. He's kind of a weird guy. He's a maniac. He lives in Maine. He's a maniac. And he writes a lot of his stories. But you look at somebody like him, who's Shawshank Redemption, The Shining, It, all these crazy things that are out there. But The Shawshank is totally different than anything else. The Green Mile, the things. He's a brilliant mind. But he's such an introvert that he does his writing. When he started writing, he wasn't sure how it would go out. And when you write a book, as you well know, your very first book, if you both remember that, I remember mine because it's the only one I got, is that you're kind of putting your guts out there, People are going, well, what's with this lady? What's with this guy? And so he used Richard Bachman until he became, with a great name like Stephen King. Gosh, I wish my name was Stephen King. Stephen King. But his early works were Richard Bachman. And here's my publisher out there giving me this story, which I had already known about, but it made sense. Because he could write on a roll of toilet paper with a red crayon, and they'll make a movie out of it next week. Today, it's so hard for a first-time writer, an author, which I don't consider myself at all. that it is so hard, as Dr. Stan said, for people to buy it. They don't know who you are. They have no idea. So how do
How
you,
many books did you say come out a year?
oh my gosh, there's hundreds of,
And now with
hundreds
self-publishing,
and
it's
hundreds.
so
of
big.
300,000.
Yeah.
Stan, you were talking about luck. You know, look at Jim Murphy. He wrote the book Inner Excellence, and it sat on shelves and hardly sold dozens. And next thing you know, you see the guy reading on the sideline in the NFL. Now it's millions. You know, I mean, it's just amazing how
Yeah.
luck happened.
The most published author in the world is James Patterson.
Yeah.
And I mean, and now he's writing with Clinton, and I mean.
I met him, he's a curmudgeon.
There you go. Yeah, he is, isn't he? But I mean, he's got to have a staff of people writing his books.
Yeah,
He's got over 200 novels.
he was grumpy.
I mean, my goodness gracious, folks. I mean, that's, anyway.
Okay, well, thank you so much.